Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, are unpaid internships a valuable form of work experience, allowing young people a way into the world of work? Or are they a form of exploitation which actually reduce social mobility by allowing some to push their way ahead of less well-heeled rivals in the race for the best-paid careers? At the weekend, the Employment Minister confirmed that the government was looking at changing the law.
There's a story in the Mail on Sunday this morning that the government is looking at outlawing unpaid internships. Where are you on that?
Well, Rob, I mean, I think it is important that young people have an opportunity to get work experience. The hardest, one of the big barriers to getting a job is not having had employment experience. And so there is a role for work experience. But I think, particularly in the media, in fashion, in these very sought-after occupations, there is a concern.
Well, they tend to go to middle-class kids, don't they?
With unpaid internships, those aren't actually accessible to everybody. And I think it is right that we look at it.
So it's part of Theresa May's attack on the poshies.
It is part of making sure that we are fair to everybody. And, you know, for social mobility, it is important.
Well, I'm joined now by the Conservative MP Alex Shelbrooke, who is presenting a private members' bill later this week calling for an end to unpaid internships, and Kate Andrews of the Institute for Economic Affairs, who thinks that the government should butt out. To quote her, I'm sure. So, Alex Shelbrooke, what's wrong with a bit of unpaid work experience?
It's not a bit of unpaid work experience, is it? It's
well, it might
months
be
on end that effectively, unless you have the wealth behind you to be able to live in London on a minimum of £926 a month, it's been estimated, then you either need to have relatives or friends living in and around London. And I say London because roughly 80% of internships are in the capital city. And for everybody who says it will reduce opportunity, well, where does that opportunity lie? My argument is it only lies with those who are wealthy enough to exploit it in the first place.
But, I mean, isn't that true? If you can't afford to be unpaid for months on end, or the bank of mummy and daddy aren't putting you up in a paid-for flat, then you cannot afford to take an unpaid internship.
Well, there's no doubt that paid internships are a fantastic thing, and I would encourage companies, especially big profit-making companies who have the ability to pay their interns to do so. If you go to glassdoor.co.uk, it looks like a lot of those companies that we would expect it from, like Goldman Sachs, Google, Facebook, they are paying their interns on average thousands of pounds a month. So those internships do exist. My deep concern is for small businesses, the charity sector. Where I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs, we bring about 100 interns into the building over the course of a year. We're a staff of 30. We're a charity, you know, we're a non-profit. And all of a sudden we had to pay those 100 interns the minimum wage. We would just have to cut the program. We simply could not afford it.
So you just stop offering internships, or could you just offer a few and pay for them?
Well, I think we would definitely try to still offer a few, and we already do have bursary schemes where we try to help those who, you know, might come from working class backgrounds who can't afford it. But there's no doubt that opportunity would be lost.
I don't understand this. You're a charity. You can have volunteers come and work for a charity. That's separate to internships. I think you're confusing the two.
Well, I'm not confusing the two. We call them internships because they're all different things that happen over the course of the program. They get to actually do projects that include work so they can put that on their CV.
So do they? Because I think that's one of the complaints is actually it's just cheap labour. You get someone in to do your photocopying for you for nothing.
And it's so important that if you think you're in an internship that should be classified as a job, you're getting long-term projects, the internship is endless, you know, it's months on end with no end date, then you need to report that. But the law allows us to do that now.
Right.
But to actually crack down on internships will take away opportunity.
Right. Because what are you planning to do about it?
OK, now this is the specific point. It's all very well saying you can report it, you can move it forward. That's not the reality we live in, because you need to get the references, you need to get to... Well, I mean, of course, the bill is an adjustment to the Minimum Wage Act, which has seen effectively a loophole get exploited. What the issue here is that how do you make sure that government takes some intervention to make sure people are protected in the workplace? And as Theresa May said in her conference speech, some government intervention is sometimes the right thing to do. The bill itself precludes people of compulsory school age, because work experience is an important thing, and it also precludes people on accredited degree courses.
And what about size of businesses?
No, But in terms of
in the fashion industry, in the charity industry, in the media industry, where there's very little money to go around very often, you would actually prefer to take those internships off the shelf because those businesses could not afford to pay them than to have them there unpaid. You just want to take opportunity out of the market to make things more fair.
Are you seriously telling me that the fashion industry is a pauper industry?
If it's at the top, like I already said, if we're looking at these big companies at the top that are making lots of profits in fashion and finance, yes, they can pay. But there are loads of mom-and-pop shops that can't.
You saw the Mail on Sunday story, which was one I researched, about Vivienne Westwood. This is hardly
Again,
a
at
small
the top,
company
Vivienne Westwood does not represent most people in the fashion industry. Goldman Sachs does not represent most businesses.
But Kate, you do admit that actually only those who could afford to, even in small think tanks or businesses or charities, it would be only the rich that could benefit from those. You admit that, at the very least. You're saying they can't afford it, but you admit that they are only an option for people who can afford them.
Well, this is such an important point, is this issue of cost of living and the fact that London rent prices are so high that most people, even if they're working in London, can't afford to pay them for a month, is a huge issue. And if the government could get behind some planning liberation in order to allow rent prices to go down, these issues would sort itself out in the cost of living crisis.
There's vacillation for that. I think this is a good idea. I've always, even when I was a small company, we paid, well, it didn't exactly exist in the same structure, London living wage to our interns who.
So you've always paid for it,
and that's the real living wage, not the George Osborne rebrand of the living wage.
So you managed to afford to do that even when you were, as you say, small.
Now there's a slight difference. Coming in for a week or two's work experience to view what's going on is a little bit different to that. But someone coming in on a 3-month internship programme, I think you can afford to pay for. And my charity does the same. We pay internship programmes. Volunteering is different. And I have to say, I'm going to be honest, this corporation that we're talking in right now is one of the worst traditionally for doing this. And I know many people who started at the BBC because they were able to do 6-month unpaid work internships. And that's how they got in. And they came from more affluent families. I'm a boy from a forest originally who's done good. And I wouldn't have had those opportunities. I could not have done a 3-month internship when I graduated from university. I couldn't have afforded to. And I think it does hit social mobility. And yes, we have to help charities with volunteer schemes and other things that are allowed. But ultimately, to just promulgate, we already have nepotism that helps the children of rich and powerful and connected people. And then you're putting a financial element to it. I think it's an interesting issue, the way you're arguing it.
Let's look at it politically, though, because is it going to happen, your bill? I mean, Martin says he supports it. Kate obviously doesn't. But the point is, there have been a lot of politicians giving the rhetoric about doing something about issues like this in terms of promoting social mobility, and nothing happens. David Cameron vetoed the idea from Nick Clegg in the coalition government. So the government hasn't got a good record on it, has it?
Well, I was told I'd have to resign as a PPS if I took this private member's bill forward. My answer was sack me. Now, I'm not a PPS anymore. It was a slightly different scenario. You know, that was the threat on it. I'm a backbench MP. I've been pushing on this issue for over 2.5 years now. It is chip away and raising it up the agenda. What I've managed to achieve in the last week or so has hugely pushed this forward.
What have you achieved in terms of real political?
We are talking about it now. And there's more pressure building. You heard what the Employment Minister said.
He was equivocal, I think. He said they were looking at it.
But this is what you've got to do. You've got to keep pushing it forward. Will this bill ultimately become law? Of course, I would hope for that. But it doesn't mean you stop at each hurdle.
Well, it is harder now than ever before for young people to get on the career ladder. And if the government were to bring this in and we were to see the opportunity for internships and work placements to drop off significantly because people couldn't afford to pay on that small business level.
I don't accept that.
Well, I appreciate that you seem to think that every fashion industry is Vivienne Westwood.
Let Alec answer and then I'll come back to you.
YouGov said that over 40% of people offered an internship have to then turn it down because they financially can't afford it. Now, 40% of people being offered them, that is a huge number.
And also, Kate,
this isn't just a minor issue.
Let me put to you also that even if it's unpaid, a lot of those unpaid internships come through family, come through friends, come through contacts. So actually, there's still an inbuilt disadvantage, if you like. So actually, making them paid would just put it on a level playing field.
What we've heard, the real issues of the day, are issues of nepotism and education not enabling people to get to these opportunities. We've heard issues of the cost of living. But what you're actually advocating, and I haven't heard rebutted, is the idea that if you force small businesses who cannot pay for 100 people a year to be on the minimum wage for a period of time at their company, you seem to believe that they're just going to continue to do that. No, we're going to lose the opportunities. And you haven't rebutted that we'll lose those opportunities.
Your argument simply says that companies should be able to pay their staff and people who come in and provide productive productive things for them to do whatever they want.
They're interns.
Because,
and again,
yes, and that's the problem.
If you are a staff member and you believe...
I've been asked a question,
let Martin answer.
You've been used... they are being used to provide real work. We know this goes on. They do genuine real work in institutions that pumps that business, and you're saying that business doesn't have to pay them minimum wage. Some of us have been campaigning for real rights for people who go into employment and do real work for a long time. And I think it's a little bit rich to come, and I think you're using the charity excuse, which is a little different sector, and small businesses have to pay their staff too.
Again, if anybody out there believes that they, as a staff member, are actually a staff member, not an intern,
people don't report companies. People don't.
That's an issue with
21-year-olds do
law.
not.
Please come to the Institute of Economic Affairs. We'll give you an internship. Bring your niece, bring your nephew, bring your kids, bring whoever, and come see what kind of process that is. It's a learning process. They get events, they get discussions, they get lectures. They
but Kate, if there is a value,
if there
is a value on the work they're doing, why not pay for it?
If a company has the money to do it, as I said, I would heavily encourage them to do so, and it looks like they do. But a lot of companies at that smaller level don't.
We've heard these arguments before when we were banning the slave trade.
Oh,
do you compare it to that? Do you compare this sort of thing to banning the slave
trade?
trade? Is that not?
I quote Charlie Mullins today. I quote Charlie Mullins today. The owner of CEO of Pimlico Plumbers said, "If you want somebody to work for you for no pay, it is slavery."
But you must admit, Alec, there have been a lot of people that have benefited from unpaid internships. To compare it to the slave trade, isn't that a bit of a leap?
No, I think it is a form of slavery. We just had a modern slavery
voluntary
act. You are
work
asking
from people who
people.
want to get on the career
You're
ladder
asking people to work for free.
Kate, don't talk over each other. But Kate, you respond, and then I'll get a final word from Martin Lewis.
People who are desperate to get on the career ladder, who want to go into sectors that don't necessarily have a lot of money, who are volunteering their time to get to know the sector and to go and to meet the right people. You're comparing to slaves.
Let her finish.
That is so deeply insulting to anybody who has actually been forced to do something.
On that note, I'm going to very, very finally ask you about student debt, because someone might say, students are paying back all this. Well, no, students are paying back all this money. What's a few months unpaid work experience going to do? Just add a little bit more to the debt they already owe.
Well, look, we have big problems in the student finance system at the moment. In Britain, generally, when you sign a contract, that contract is locked into law. When you get out a loan, those terms and conditions are locked into law. But the one exception to that is student loans, where the government has retrospectively changed the terms after millions of students signed up for their contracts. And that's a big issue going on right now. And if you ask me, does it add to the... Well, you must remember we have income contingent loans in this country. So the one advantage of doing an internship is you don't earn enough to start repaying back your student loan. But I'd still want people to earn more money, which is the way that it goes through. And I think to finish on that, it's not slavery, and I think that's a dangerous route to start pushing it past. Having said that, what you haven't answered, and what you keep fluffing this onto small businesses who can't afford to get people to work for them. And I'm asking you, what about people who come from non-privileged backgrounds who have no income? What do they do? You leave them and you ruin social mobility.
We're going to have to finish it there. I'm sure we will discuss this again if you get anywhere with your private members bill. Thank you both very much.